are now receiving word from BYU Idaho that the students believe the news media is contentious. Our 4 reporters have the latest data regarding this matter. Michaela?
In this graph, we decided to compare the data of 2 different news sources. We wanted to see if BYU Idaho students believed the news is too contentious depending on where they got their news from. We took both a Republican and Democratic news source and compared the data. It was found that those who consumed Fox News as their daily resource believed that the news was not too contentious. Those who consumed the New York Times as their daily resource believed that the news was too contentious. Now, what does this say about the more Democratic news source? Is the New York Times spreading contention? What does this say about Fox News? Do they avoid contention more than the other news stations? The data is here, so now this is for you to decide.
BYU Idaho students consume news through the New York Times and Fox News. But what about social media? Here's the latest from Erica on social media news consumption. Erica?
As we are looking at students and contention in news media, we realize a huge population of students consume their news media through social media. Figure 3 here shows the relationship between opinions of contention in news media and social media consumption. We learned that students who consumed most of their news from Facebook and other social media apps find news media to be a lot more contentious. Though looking specifically at correlations, we wondered and learned whether students believed news media to be contentious generally speaking. In Figure 4 here, we learned that 91.72% of BYU Idaho students believe news media to be contentious.
If we compare the consumption of Fox News with social media, what would we get? Here's a page on students are most likely to get their news from social media compared to Fox News. Page.
In order to understand Figure 5, first we need to address how the scaling for this question worked. How the scaling worked was 1 meant they were most likely to go to that resource, and 7 the least likely to go to that resource on the Likert scale. Knowing this, we can clearly understand that the resource with the smaller average is the most used resource, that resource being social media. From this, we get a bit more information to help understand the previous graphs. Do students believe social media to be one of the most contentious platforms because it's one of the most used, or is there more behind this?
Let's look deeper at the relationship of other news sources and contention. Here's Brielle with the most average news source consumed by BYU Idaho students. Brielle? Figure 6 here shows 15 different news sources that BYU students consume. It also shows the average frequency of news consumed. Students were asked on a scale of 1 to 7 how frequently they consume the specific news source, 1 being never and 7 being very frequent. The trustworthy news sources were in the higher numbers of the 1 to 7 scale, meaning that students who trusted their news would consume them more frequently. The more contentious news sources were in the lower numbers of the 1 to 7 scale, meaning that students who did not consume the specific news source frequently find those sources more contentious. The more trustworthy news sources for students ended up being Fox News or CNN. BYU Idaho students consume a wide range of news media, but is there a relationship with gender and believing the news to be contentious? Here's Paige on why women are more likely than men to believe the news is contentious. Paige?
From Figure 7, we can see that women are more likely than men to believe the news is contentious. This Likert scale works similar to the others around averages, where the lower average was more likely to believe the news to be contentious. Based off this information and previous information presented, is there a reason women believe the media to be more contentious? Are more women looking at contentious resources? Are there purely more women on the BYU Idaho campus? Regardless, from this information presented, we can see that BYU Idaho students believe the media to be contentious. We can also see that this can largely be because of the media that BYU Idaho students are consuming. These findings suggest that BYU Idaho students need to consume news media from multiple different sources rather than relying on one media source in hopes of finding less contentious news sources.
And there you have it. BYU Idaho students believe the news to be contentious as we have seen through the relationship of top news sources compared to social media news sources and other information. This is COM 280 News. Thank you for watching.